Thank you, Ranking Member Huffman. Pursuant to the markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 7487, the Rural Jobs and Hydropower Expansion Act. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purpose of debate on the bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Boebert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 7487, the Rural Jobs and Hydropower Expansion Act, to streamline non-federal hydropower development on Bureau of Reclamation facilities, create rural jobs, and expand clean, reliable domestic energy production. Currently, the permitting process for non-federal hydropower development on Bureau of Reclamation projects are unnecessarily complex. They fall under Reclamation's lease of power privilege contract, a federal energy regulatory commission license, or in many cases, both. If a reclamation project was authorized for federal hydropower development, non-federal developers must obtain a lease of power privilege. However, if the project was not, current law places it under FERC's jurisdiction. This jurisdictional split has resulted in roughly 69 non-federal projects being subjected to duplicative permitting processes, with approximately 12 additional projects currently in the development pipeline facing the same obstacles. H.R. 7487 offers a common sense solution. The bill amends the Reclamation Project Act of 1939 to provide the Bureau of Rec with exclusive authority for non-federal hydropower development within reclamation projects. This will eliminate the dual permitting regime, reduce unnecessary delays and costs, and provide regulatory certainty for developers. This legislation builds upon the strong bipartisan precedent established in the 113th Congress, which authorizes reclamation to contract for small conduit hydropower development. This bill passed 416-7, with even Ranking Member Huffman voting in support of H.R. 7487, simply expands that successful approach to all reclamation facilities. I've been working on this bill for years now. Last Congress, at a hearing on the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee hearing, the Biden appointee David Palumbo, Deputy Commissioner at the U.S. Bureau of Rec, testified that this bill, quote, builds on past successful bipartisan efforts to streamline the permitting process, spurring additional non-federal hydropower development on reclamation projects. And that reclamation supports the intent of the legislation to streamline the permitting process. My office and the committee staff here have also worked extensively with Reclamation, WAPA, CREDA, and the power customers of in the Colorado River Basin, who all support the ANS. I am proud that this bill is bipartisan, and I thank Representative Adam Gray for his partnership in introducing this legislation. Together, we are advancing a common-sense bipartisan bill that will create jobs and expand clean and reliable hydropower generation and support rural economies while making better use of existing federal infrastructure. And I would very much like to convince the ranking member to join us in supporting this and the rest of the committee here today and favorably pass H.R. 7487. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The lady yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Mr. Gray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Expanding hydropower is crucial for energy production and water storage, frankly, throughout the West. Despite what seems to be bipartisan agreement or consensus this Congress around domestic energy production, the federal permitting process, I've joined on the SPEED Act, Mr. Chairman, and some of the other efforts to move things along. The federal permitting process for hydropower remains unnecessarily slow, costly, and dysfunctional. This is exactly why I joined Congresswoman Boebert in introducing the Rural Jobs and Hydropower Expansion Act. Currently, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission permitting and relicensing process is a nightmare to navigate. Projects can spend more than a decade waiting to move through the process, often dealing with duplicative studies, new and unrealistic requirements, and endless delays, driving up costs for water operators and ratepayers. In my district, there are several major hydropower relicensing efforts underway before FERC, many of which are submitting applications for relicensing under a Biden-era rule due to the administration's inability to update the Clean Water Act Section 401. These districts have dealt with burdensome state and federal relicensing requirements that consume enormous amounts of time and enormous amounts of resources. They aren't trying to build something new and untested. In fact, they have responsibly operated these facilities for over 100 years, while delivering affordable electricity, irrigation water, recreational opportunities, and environmental stewardship for our community. Yet the current FERC process punishes these operators with uncertainty and delay. It takes over 10 years to prepare and secure approvals, projects become more expensive, and investments in our environment are postponed. If we're serious about increasing our water supply and our energy reliability, we cannot continue to allow projects to be held up by these types of processes. Delivering water and generating hydropower is dependent on finding workable solutions between federal agencies and operators. This is not about eliminating environmental review. It's about making the process efficient and predictable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate the gentlelady from Colorado pointing out that there is precedent for a Huffman-Boebert collaboration on these matters, and there's actually a way to get there on this bill too. So I will, try to lay that out as fairly as I can. But what it comes down to is that this move of jurisdiction for some projects from FERC over to Interior might make sense. I'm open to that possibility, but if you're going to move all of that authority from FERC to Interior, you need to move the safeguards that have been built over many years along with it. And as it's currently drafted, that is not the case. If we fail to do that, if we just move it over as a blank slate, that could have very significant impacts because FERC, of course, oversees most non-federal hydropower through the Federal Power Act process where Congress has worked for many, many years, debated, amended, improved that law to promote not only hydro, but also the protection of other very important public interests, including public lands, fish and wildlife, and tribal resources. And that broader focus is very important because hydropower projects are great, but they can have major impacts on rivers, fisheries, recreation, tribal resources, especially if they're poorly conceived or designed or operated. So, what are some of the Federal Power Act protections that would no longer apply as currently drafted? And this is the part that I think needs to be fixed. One is the major protection for federal reservations. That includes tribal reservations, national forests, and other areas set aside as reserved for public purposes. Under the Federal Power Act, before FERC licenses or relicenses a hydro project affecting any of these reservations, FERC has to determine that the project won't interfere with or be inconsistent with the purposes for which that reservation was created. Federal Power Act also helps protect tribes. Tribal resources and tribal treaty rights are affected by non-federal hydropower development, and so we give tribes and federal agencies with trust and resource responsibilities a formal role in shaping hydropower license conditions. Unfortunately, I think we all know there's a long history of poorly conceived hydro projects damaging tribal trust lands, rivers, fisheries, and cultural resources as well. And that's why the FERC process has been updated over the years to help ensure tribal interests are considered and respected during the licensing process. Federal Power Act also includes specific protections for public recreation and fish and wildlife that would no longer apply to projects under this legislation as drafted. But under FERC, the agency is directed to give equal consideration to recreational opportunities, fish and wildlife, and other environmental values affected by a hydro project. And in certain cases, FERC must consider recommendations from federal and state fish and wildlife agencies and include license conditions to protect and mitigate damage to fish and wildlife affected by the project. So those requirements give federal land and resource managers important tools to protect these values. These and other protections embedded in the FERC process are enforceable safeguards that Congress has put in place for very important reasons over the years. I'm not necessarily against the direction of this bill, but we do need to keep working together, and I will give you a chance to do that with an amendment here in a moment to make sure that those safeguards are transferred along with the jurisdiction and authority. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Stauber, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I rise in strong support of Representative Boebert's bill. I want to congratulate Representative Gray for this bipartisan effort. This is a very, very good piece of legislation. The duplicative reviews that continuously go on. We need to get this hydropower, this energy online. We're going to need this energy. And you have two members on the opposite side of the aisle that can agree on this. I think this is a very good bill. It streamlines the permitting and project reviews. It puts one federal agency in charge, and it does not bypass any permitting or project reviews. All covered projects would still need to go through the extensive project and permitting reviews by the Bureau of Reclamation. This is the exact type of legislation that we need to allow energy to come online in this country. So with the remainder of my time, I'm going to yield it to the Representative Boebert, the sponsor of the bill.
Thank you. I heard the ranking member mention that he likes hydro. I did not hear the ranking member mention that he likes rural jobs. And so I would hope it's not the gentleman's position that he hates rural jobs. We are looking to expand these jobs and water storage and energy production. Just listening to my colleague, Congressman Gray, and the common sense language he uses around this bill, talking about the reduction of permitting. Anywhere you go, everyone is frustrated at the burdensome regulations, the duplicative processes within the federal government. And in this committee, I would think most of us, especially those in the West, our top three issues are water, water, water. And so this is a huge focus in my district and throughout the West. I understand, in some parts in the East, you can stick a shovel in the ground and water is going to come out, but we don't have that out West. But we want to end the slow process, the endless delays that are impacting these projects. We, of course, want clean water. We want to do this responsibly. We are good stewards of our land. And so just because we are in these Western states, we aren't going to become the Wild West just by moving this to the Department of Interior and streamlining this process, making it more efficient. I again, strongly urge support of this. And, when it comes to FERC, I see FERC as a four-letter word that harms many water users and good projects that we are looking to move forward on. Mr. Stauber, I yield to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, it's a good piece of legislation, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? I recognize myself for 5 minutes, not to rise in strong support of Representative Boebert and Representative Gray's bill, H.R. 7487, the Rural Jobs and Hydropower Expansion Act. I commend them for working on another bipartisan issue to help strengthen our country's energy infrastructure. And, oftentimes we face complicated issues in Congress, but to me this one's kind of low-hanging fruit because we're talking about a form of power that almost everybody likes hydropower. There's something in hydropower for everyone. It is, there's no carbon emissions with hydropower. It's renewable. It offers storage. I know in our hearing yesterday, Mr. Huffman submitted a battery to the record, which I had to check with staff to make sure we could put a battery in the record. I can't really put a reservoir in the record, but I could lift a bottle of water, which illustrates contained water that's elevated that has all that potential energy, and we know that a dam just converts that potential energy into kinetic energy. And when it rains, it fills the reservoir back up. And we're talking about dams that are already in place. Now, there's no perfect energy out there. You can say if we disturb nature, we've done some kind of harm, but it's hard to find much that's wrong with hydropower, especially when we've got dams that are out there that could have hydropower added to them. You know, the Bureau of Reclamation looked into, I believe it was 530 dams that are out there, and 191 of them had some hydropower potential, and they say that 70 sites show potential for economic development of hydropower. Those 70 sites could yield an additional generating capacity of 225 megawatts. So that's 225 megawatts of renewable, clean baseload power. It can be baseload power, it can be peaking power. That's the flexibility that you have with hydro. And this legislation moves the ball forward and allows that development to happen more rapidly. So again, I commend the co-sponsors and the lead sponsors of this bill. I hope that we can get a strong vote on it, and I hope this is something we can move through the House and through the Senate and get it on the President's desk sooner than later. I strongly support the bill, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the bill? If there's no further discussion, it's now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 7487. We will now consider the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 7487 offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, designated Boebert 50 ANS. Without objection, the amendment is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Ms. Boebert, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reiterate on this bill just the importance of streamlining this process. The Rural Jobs and Hydro Expansion Act, this would streamline the non-federal hydropower development of the Bureau of Reclamation facilities. It will create rural jobs and expand clean and reliable domestic energy production. I am honored to have Congressman Gray as a bipartisan co-sponsor, co-lead of this bill, and I would urge my colleagues to support this piece of legislation, and I will yield back. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the ANS? I recognize myself. I do support the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 7487. It contains technical and clarifying changes to the bill identified through the technical assistance process with reclamation. I urge my colleagues to support the ANS, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the ANS? There's no further discussion. We will now consider the amendment designated Huffman number 1, offered by Ranking Member Huffman. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Ranking Member Huffman, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to assure my friend from Colorado I care about rural jobs too. Represent a lot of rural Northern California, and that includes some hydro projects, and so I know that the guardrails that have been carefully created under the Federal Power Act over many, many years do a lot to protect rural jobs, and that includes all the jobs in the recreation and outdoor economy that are so important to many parts of rural America, and it includes tribal jobs by making sure that tribes actually have a voice and a little bit of power in the licensing process. So there's lots of different rural jobs that are protected by these guardrails. And if you don't have those guardrails, you are at risk of having a project that just comes in and builds itself in a rural place and then ships all that power off to AI data centers and cities without the guardrails to protect the rural jobs that we say we all care about. So let's be careful and get this right. That's what this amendment is all about. We've talked about how this bill would move many non-federal hydro projects out of FERC jurisdiction and over to the Department of Interior instead. The amendment simply says that if Interior is now going to permit these projects, it should preserve those same safeguards that exist in the FERC process. In statute, not just an environmental review. I heard Mr. Stauber's point. Having an environmental review is nice, but the FERC process has very specific statutory guardrails and safeguards, and that's what this amendment would preserve. It's pretty straightforward, and if it's approved, I hope that all my colleagues would want to see these guardrails and safeguards incorporated, then I'd be happy to support the bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Ms. Boebert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to strongly oppose this amendment. This amendment is nothing more than a poison pill designed to kill the very purpose of H.R. 7487. I oppose this amendment because it defeats the core purpose of H.R. 7487 to streamline non-federal hydropower development on Bureau of Reclamation facilities, create rural jobs, expand clean water, reliable domestic energy production. H.R. 7487 expands the Bureau of Rec's lease of power privilege authority to unlock more hydropower on existing federal infrastructure without forcing every project through FERC licensing processes. This amendment effectively reimports the entire FERC regulatory regime into the reclamation class. This amendment piles on more studies, more consultations, more mitigation demands, and, of course, more delay. This will result in projects that should take months, and they'll end up taking years. Costs will explode, and investors will walk away from these projects. But some of my colleagues have some friends who seem to have friends who are radical environmentalist lobbyists, and they just can't help themselves to really FERC this up. They would rather keep rural Western communities poor and dependent than let them develop their own resources. The Secretary of Interior can handle these leases without mimicking the slowest, most expensive licensing process in the federal government. This amendment kills jobs, kills new hydropower, and kills opportunity for rural America. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment and keep H.R. 7487 focused on American energy production, American jobs, and American strength. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I think the purpose of the bill is very straightforward as described in the A&S. If you look at it, there are two types of dams under Bureau of Reclamation. There are those dams that are approved for hydropower, and then the other category that has jurisdiction with both Bureau of Reclamation and FERC. All we want to do, and all the bill does, is move the jurisdiction of those non-power dams under Bureau of Reclamation so they can go through the process that is a well-outlined process to make sure that everything's done properly. It will be a way to fast-track the development of more hydropower. As I said earlier, we're looking at maybe 225 megawatts of new carbon-free, renewable, baseload, or peaking power, however it's used. That's pretty straightforward. The reason I oppose Ranking Member Huffman's amendment, and I think he's almost there, but it would take the same regulatory process under FERC and overlay that with Bureau of Reclamation, which already has a process, make it duplicative and more complicated, and I think defeat the main purpose of the underlying legislation. So I oppose the amendment. I encourage everyone else to oppose it, and I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Stansberry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to the ranking member.
I thank the gentlelady from New Mexico. I'm disappointed to hear that simply incorporating the same carefully constructed federal guardrails for tribes, for fish and wildlife, and for the outdoor economy and recreation, that simply incorporating those guardrails would defeat the entire purpose of this legislation. And, stated that way, that seems to suggest that the entire purpose of this legislation is to circumvent those guardrails. There's no other way to interpret it. And that's disappointing. I thought the purpose was to avoid duplication and to have a more sensible streamlining of these processes. And that's something I'm very open to talking about. But if this is about circumventing these carefully constructed guardrails, that's a whole different subject. And I just want to remind my colleagues that tribal nations have had to fight and claw and over many, many years work to get their seat at the table against all manner of discrimination and injustice. And this is one of these cases where they have gotten a voice in the FERC licensing process through the Federal Power Act, and we're now talking about taking it away. I think that should be deeply disturbing to anyone that represents Indian country and says that they care about sovereignty and tribal nations. And with that, I yield back.
Ms. Stansberry, the time is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. This young lady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the amendment is not agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. At this point, we're going to take an approximately 10-minute recess, and we will reconvene when we give people time to get here to vote on the amendment and the underlying legislation. The committee is in recess.